Aaron Christian. I'm based in East London and I am a director, producer, podcast host and a photographer maybe? Yeah. Born and raised in East London, spent the majority of my childhood in Stratford. My parents migrated from Malaysia, so they moved in the 70s, I believe, so they're from Malaysian-Indian and Sri Lankan descent. Semi-raised by English Cockney grandparents. A core part of my identity and my upbringing has been super diverse and multicultural. I think an early part of what I was interested in, before I even knew it was a creative endeavor, was always, I guess, style or fashion. So the only way you could express your personal style, and this is me talking about like when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, was the shoes you could wear, the rucksack or bag you could take to school, and your coat. So yeah, I think from that early age, there was always an element of like, how can I kind of represent who I am through those pieces? I think that just elevated throughout my life. There was always a way of trying to stand out or taking an interest in the things that I put on and a way to try to express myself. So basketball was a huge influence. I kind of represented England to under 16s back in the day, played for Newham. So I guess that again was the evolution of my introduction to fashion and streetwear. Basketball kicks, trainers, sneaker culture back in the 90s was like a huge influence. So I guess during school, I was still kind of figuring out what I was interested in. I studied art and graphic design. Those were like two mediums that I was really interested in. My parents, I'm from Malaysian-Indian, so they naturally wanted to veer us into more academic routes. My dad is an accountant, my mum's a nurse, so which is like super stereotypical. I was super grateful for them allowing us to actually choose creative paths. So I think that probably comes down from the fact that they were the only siblings to move over to the UK. What happens in a lot of South Asian households is that you have the wider kind of extended family kind of looking in and kind of basically judging the shit out of you. And I think that's a lot of pressure why people kind of tend to stick with more traditional career paths, like going to be a doctor or finance and stuff. And I think because my parents didn't have that family looking over their shoulder, they could probably take a few more risks. So yeah, they ended up allowing all three of us. I'm the middle child, so my older brother, my younger sister, all kind of eventually went into the creative industries. I kind of sidestepped going into film and what I studied, and I then kind of pivoted into my other kind of passion, which was fashion. At the time, my brother was trying to go freelance and do freelance styling. I was like, can I work with you in some capacity while I kind of figure out what my next steps are in terms of the actual career projection? And I was like, as long as I can kind of use moving image in film, so dad isn't on my back saying I wasted 3 years. So we then had this great stroke terrible idea of trying to build a men's style consultancy. As you can imagine, two inexperienced young straight brown guys trying to teach men back then how to dress. And we didn't have the best business acumen at the time. Business fell flat on its face, but this was early days of digital, so the business of like actual style consulting wasn't really going well. But at the time, I think the blogging kind of space was really starting to take shape. So I was like, why don't we market that service through a blog and through content? We created a website, it was called INDIVIDUALISM, and I think that was the first time that I really started to fall in love with the idea of being a creative. That then became one of the biggest menswear sites in the UK at the time. And it's funny when you really kind of fall in love with a practice or like a discipline, the amount of work you can kind of churn out by just being in love with the, I guess, with the creation and the art form. So yeah, we were churning out shoots, kind of figuring out how to produce shoots, how to do shoots, how to go into post-production, how to like cast, then kind of working with people similar to ourselves that hadn't really got into the industry, didn't know how to get into the industry, young working class people of colour. But there was a camaraderie, there was a real drive and passion from everyone. And I think that's what really kind of took that kind of website to where it was. Well, I guess maybe an interesting point is at the time when we were launching that site or when we were kind of putting the team together, we weren't like looking for like people of color, you need to be in this thing. I think it was just the spaces that I was exposed to, the people that I worked and socialized with happened to be a diverse mix of people. Now that obviously comes from being in East London, being in the privilege of being in a big city that has such a rich tapestry of cultures. It was a playground to create, as well as a real kind of business education for myself. It was an amazing space, but it was really difficult to monetize, and I was still kind of styling. So I was like, let me try to figure out to get a job inside the industry, so working in advertising or something, while we still kind of keep this site going. I remember being on the shop floor at Top Man, so I was still working there part-time, and seeing the editor of Esquire randomly was like, fuck it, gonna introduce myself, spoke to him, and he was like, yeah, contact my assistant, and next week see if we can get you an internship. I thought he had parred me off, so like, I think I waited like 3 weeks, got nothing. Then on the 4th week I got an email, and they were like, yeah, there's an internship at Esquire. So yeah, so that was like a dream come true. I'd started interning at Esquire, which was on Carnaby Street at the time, and I was like, wow, this is like, literally can't believe I'm in this space, you know, Hearst magazines and everything. I think the second day that I'd worked there, he took the company, and this guy's name's Jeremy Langmead, who's like a legend in the kind of fashion editorial space. He took the whole company, or the team, to the boardroom and was like, I'm moving to a new company, you wouldn't have heard of it, it's called Mr. Porter. And I was like, shit, the moment I get an in, this kind of contact leaves. I stayed in contact with him on Twitter, and a year later he DM'd me and said, there's a role to run the film department at Mr. Porter, I think you should apply, you've got a good background, you studied film, but you're interested in menswear and fashion, you're kind of on the cusp of this digital space. So yeah, so that led me to that job, which was probably the best job I've ever had. Yeah, ended up kind of landing that role, which was to kind of run the film department at its inception at Mr. Porter, which I was there for about just under 4 years, traveling everywhere, like learning film production in the menswear editorial space, really setting the bar, you know, meeting all my menswear heroes. And then, yeah, I kind of left to go freelance because I wanted to develop myself and my voice as a filmmaker, figure out what my voice was. And then that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 8 years. As I've got older and kind of done a lot of work on myself and trying to unpack some of the value systems that I like to live by, and also kind of implement into the work that I do as a creative and a producer, there was always an element of the underdog, or always wanting to support people that I felt never really, I guess, wasn't really given opportunities. So shining a light on cultures that were underrepresented. And I guess it was an element of speaking the same type of language, or having a common background. With individualism, I think at the beginning it was me and my brother Ruben, we were kind of working on it, and he kind of just, I remember on a day, on a whim, was like, I don't want to do this styling thing, I want to go off and be a presenter. And I'd thrown so much of my kind of ambition or everything into this thing, and I was like, he's just bounced out, what am I going to do? And actually that was probably the real beginning of figuring out my own creative voice, confidence, because I think I'd looked up to my brother a lot, and I still do, but I think at that point there was like a new path that started to shape out, in that I can do things on my own and stuff like that. So that was massive. And in the end, Indiv kind of then became shaped by my own taste and sense of how I wanted this kind of project, a company, to grow. And that was probably one of the biggest ones, actually. It was the first time that I realized I can kind of do stuff and have confidence in my own creative vision. And then, yeah, kind of similar, I think every other job I've always been let go. So whether it was Top Man wanting to like be one of their head stylists, and I got made redundant there. I got made redundant at Mr. P as well. I got thrown into deep end and having to kind of like just go off on my own. And that was like the biggest kind of leveling up, because I had to kind of think on my feet and figure out how to operate, not just as a filmmaker, but as an independent freelance creative, like, how to operate, how to run the business, how to network, all of that stuff in a super condensed space. And yeah, I look back at that, that would have never happened if I had a kind of nice, soft leaving period where I had like this 3 months notice and all of this type of stuff. I think I would have probably stayed in my comfort zone. I'm not saying being sacked is healthy, but getting forced to be out of your comfort zone and learning to look at certain things as opportunities now has become such a default way of looking at the world. So I think now that the time I spend being upset or feeling sorry for myself just gets shorter. So I still allow myself to feel shit sometimes when something happens, but the time I dwell and spend in that space has got shorter, and to then look left and reframe, that skill set and muscle has got a lot better, and it's served me, super well. I find it boring if something's been, talked about a million times. I'm like, where is the stuff that is new or interesting, or where's the kind of cultures or stories that we haven't heard? That's just, the stuff that I'm driven to speak about or try to help platform. I was doing that kind of maybe unconsciously in a way, and I think I kind of went through a bit of a rebrand with my content studio at AC Studios, and it was like, what is the kind of work that I want to be aligned to? What is the legacy of the work that I'm going to leave behind when I'm gone? There's a famous TED talk by Simon Sinek. You may have heard, it's called Start With Why. So it's this golden circle why thing, and it's like, essentially, I'm sure a lot of people watching this probably know this stuff, but it's like why amazing companies do things, not what they do. So he then created a second book, which is more of kind of workshop book, called Find Your Why, and it's more veered towards helping people and brands figure out their purpose. It was at a time where there wasn't that much clarity in terms of what I wanted to do, and kind of going through that process was amazing. It was like, just basically provided so much clarity, and it kind of leads on to now all the work that I do, whether it's my production company, whether it's the podcast that I do, whether it's the Asian Man casting studio stroke book that I do. What that book and that process allowed me to do was like, there's a consistent thread and theme. So the format of whatever you do doesn't matter as long as it kind of aligns to some of these value systems. So essentially that book, the process of it, if you're interested, is that you kind of go through your past, you write down 10 of the most amazing, memorable moments in your life, 10 of the most toughest, and it doesn't have to be career, it could be anything. So mine was like the first time I walked down Fifth Avenue, first time I went to Malaysia, bunch of different things, and essentially you're trying to pull out, and someone else is doing this. It's a bit like therapy, and they're trying to figure out words or themes that keep coming up, and then use those words to create a sentence. So I'll tell you, my sentence is to discover, reveal, connect, and champion underappreciated people and places so that I can progressively shape the way people see the world. So essentially, the key things in that was that there was always a theme of traveling and discovering new stuff. Within that, it was always talking about and shining a light on projects or people or cultures or places. And then the reason why I'm doing that is so that I could progressively shape how people see the world through a visual format. And once I kind of landed on that, all these other projects started to align. So the podcast is always around shining a light on South Asians that are going against the grain, and what we stand for as AC Studios is like, we love to storytell around cultures and people. There was always this kind of confidence that I never really saw that I didn't deserve to be in a room. Now, as I've got older, I've understood there's an element of me being a guy. There's different levels of being on that kind of like privilege ladder, but I don't know where the confidence came. I just always thought I deserve to be in this room if I think my work's good. And so, I never really saw that kind of like being a person of color as something to hold me back. If anything, I always thought that it was a superpower. Like, I could go into a room at Mr. P, because in Mr. Porter, you kind of get to see so many different lenses and worlds, right? So you travel a lot, you get to see people living in different ways, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I never thought that was a bad thing. I was like, that's just their life, and this is amazing to be exposed to this stuff. But sometimes I was like, I can kind of go into a room and speak to a CEO of like, a massive company or a luxury brand, but I can also just jam in, Dixie's or whatever and speak to someone from Ends. And I thought that wasn't a bad thing. That just gave me an ability and a richness to empathize with people. And I think that's always been a thing that I've been drawn to when I work, is like, what's the core human story? What's a way that we can connect to someone? Because there's always going to be interest that people from different walks of life have. And I always found it a challenge to find that thread to kind of connect people. I made a film called The Internship. I crowdfunded it, and that was kind of a bit around my entry point into the industry, and it was talking around nepotism and stuff like that. And it was part of my story, but it was also taken from a lot of friends I felt were so much more talented than me, that didn't get that in or that opportunity. And that was one of the drivers, because I think I was like, I've worked hard, I feel I've deserved the success, but I've also really acutely aware that I've been super lucky and there's been timings and moments that have just aligned. And then to see other people that I was like, they're so much more deserving of this, and then see the reality of like, maybe they just didn't have the opportunity or the timing or whatever. So that stuff kind of irritated me. So I was like, I want to kind of maybe look into this and see how I can kind of create more of a level playing field for other people. So I think that definitely bleeds into now the company that I'm setting up, AC Studios, and what we stand for, and trying to blood more women in the film industry, and just use the small platform that I have to try to just create a bit more equity, really. Because I think having, people talk about diversity and it's a trend word, but essentially for me, it's like, why wouldn't you want a wider set of ideas and people working on projects? Because ultimately that leads to newness and new insights. I'm obsessed by process. There's two sides of it. I think because I came from a commercial background, understood kind of like how the structures work within agency, brand, and all those kind of different processes and needs within a project, right? So I didn't come with it from a creative purist, like I'm gonna write a script and create a film or a project. So it was very much like commercially led. And I think that has definitely shaped how I've approached work. So it's kind of this, I always say it's this balance of art and commerce. As a director, it's just so much about communication, whether I'm speaking to the DP, speaking to the gaffer. So trying to carve out enough time in pre-production on films to make sure all of that is as best as it can be. And then when you're getting into shooting, also learning to let go, do all this prep and create this scenario that you want to shoot all this stuff. And then it's like, okay, cool. Now let happy accidents happen as well. And that's hard. That's like, I've been shooting for 20 years and it's still, I'm learning new stuff. But I think being a director is one of those privileges, because it's one of the art forms and mediums that you can only really get good when you're super old. There's so much to learn. So I kind of frame it as like, it's a privilege to be in this space, because there's so many different layers to the art form. I tend to take on stuff because I'm so optimistic about things. I'm like, this is dope, like let's do it, cool, like get it in the diary. And it's always around like the scheduling, right? It's like if I see a free day in my calendar, I'm like, oh amazing, like let's chuck a shoot in there. When sometimes as I've got older, it's like, actually it's okay to have 2 days with nothing in there. But yeah, it's not a bad thing. I think that is definitely part of my personality. I thrive on not being busy. I think that's the wrong word now, but I thrive on like working. It's a massive privilege. I like wake up every day. I get to work with amazing people. I get to be a filmmaker, photographer, editor. I genuinely am blessed and grateful for the work that I do. So it comes from a space of optimism and joy. But yeah, I do need to learn to calm down sometimes, I guess. It's good to also have rest time and recharge time. I think it's as I got older, it's really important actually. That's often the time that like a creative insight would come up. And I think I've only learned that recently in the last 2 years, is that like that breathing space allows us to absorb the world and process all the stuff that we've been exposed to. And it's so important because it's like your lens on the world, like absorbing it and then leaving space for like an insight to kind of happen. So passion projects, I think, have always been a key part of why I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I always remind myself that freelance can be tough at the best of times, right? Like, you're always thinking about the next job. You're trying to like really balance your cash flow. You're wearing loads of hats. You've got to be your own spokesperson, your marketer. You've got to actually do the creative work, all of that stuff. So every year I'm like, why am I doing this? If I'm doing this for the art and the creativity of it, I should always be pursuing a personal project or a passion project. And that's just always been consistent. I've done, the short film London Locks, then the internship. We set up this podcast now and the Asian Man book. So I think I'm really, really lucky in that the commercial side of what I do, I still really enjoy. So I actually enjoy the commercial side of like AC Studios and working with fashion brands and stuff. So it's never like, this part is depressing me, so I have to do that. It's like, this is great, it's fun, it's giving me a paycheck, now it's my responsibility to know when to pause that and still put time into these other things. Because essentially, those passion projects are what get me exposure. They keep my kind of creativity alive. They build my network up. The value baked into those kind of creative projects are so much more than just the act of doing it, which really helps actually, because then you can kind of frame it as, you know, like a marketing exercise as well. Using a company from a commercial perspective actually can be really useful in helping change the landscape. So there's certain things that I felt I didn't see when I was growing up, getting into the industry. And I think there's a few ways of looking at it. You either complain and be like, this is shit and needs to change. I think when I realized that I have the company as a vehicle for change, then I felt there's an element of responsibility. I think it's super, super important to surround yourself with people that are, you know, not necessarily 12 steps ahead, because nowadays I think actually just the person that's 1 or 2 steps ahead of you is super, super important, right? Because often the people that are like maybe super established, they're going to be super time poor, and their access to those people are going to be difficult. So a tip I'd say is like maybe just find someone that's maybe 1 or 2 years or steps ahead of you, and like just use that to kind of like build your mentorship kind of group. I don't think you can ever have enough mentors. So I have mentors in my kind of business capacity in directing. Then there's people that I tap into for like financial help and business help. Then from a kind of like spiritual and psychological, I think there's all these elements that go into us as individuals that are really helpful. I'm a massive reader, so whether you can frame that as mentorship, I read a lot of kind of, you know, self-development and business and those type of books, and I find that stuff being really, really useful. Podcasts as well. I think just the ability to always want to grow has been something that's been really a key driver for me, and try to find your tribe as early as possible. It's not always easy to do it, and when I say tribe, that definition has changed for me, but I think it's more when you're in a room of people that are of the spirit of what you do. So they don't have to be from the same background, they don't have to necessarily be from the same industry, but their creative motivations and their goals and that type of stuff are of the same energy as you. I think, yeah, you know when you're around your peoples, basically. And I think, yeah, if you can find that tribe early on, it's super, super, super helpful, because I think you're all driven by the same kind of motivations. You're all kind of probably creatively inspired by the same type of thing. Yeah, will really help in the early days of like shouldering projects or creative burdens, and having people to speak to. You can kind of lean on those people in different ways, and also just not being alone. I think as a creative, it's especially as a director, actually, we're often the only director on set. But on a film set, there's loads of gaffers and camera teams and stuff. But directing can be a super, super lonely journey. And as now I've started to hang around other directors, I'm like, fucking hell, you know, they go through the same stuff. Like literally just to speak about the same stuff is so, yeah, so it's so amazing to know that there's, you know, again, people of the spirit that go through different stuff, and you don't feel as lonely, which I think is an important thing to have. To have that community of people. I've actively tried to surround myself with people that are more talented than me. I think is a really good way to develop and grow. That's the only way I think I'm gonna, you know, expose myself to things that that are blind spots, cover my blind spots, learn, develop my sense of vision. Because it's a balance, right? Like you kind of want to have confidence in your own vision as a creative, and that takes sometimes blocking other voices out, and then there's also being grounded enough to know when someone's input is really valid, and that's honestly really, really, really hard. You have to kind of like, I think probably the only useful thing is just spending time asking yourself that question. Am I like doubting myself, or am I being open? And I think it's not easy, but it's necessary questions that you have to ask yourself on a constant basis. I would say the thing that I tell younger people is like, try to work on soft skills that are quite evergreen and timeless, rather than saying you should go into this, because I think 5 years from now industries can change, right? Like the whole AI trend now is going to like completely change jobs, but it's also going to create new jobs that aren't even invented. So build up skills like being able to find your networking style. So networking is key, but everyone has a different style. How they're comfortable in networking will come as you start to build up your own, figure out your own style of networking. That's really key. I think learning to maintain relationships. So little things like knowing how to reach out to people, asking for their time, asking for meetings, little things. Like I remember when I first was going freelance, I'd take meetings with people, whether it's producers or marketing directors and brand directors. And I think I learned early on that taking that time is actually taking away what they could be doing for something else. So they're gifting you that time, right? So it's a little thing like just offering to pay for that coffee. Little gestures like that, like valuing and respecting other people's time, understanding how I was going to structure the business was something I avoided for a long time. And then I realized if I want to be a creative, the core running of the business is probably even more important than the creative side at the beginning. Because I think a good way to think about it is if you, as a creative, if you want to be creating for a long time, then the realistic way to think about it is you need to be able to fund it. So like try not to stick your head in the sand. Like you're going to need to figure out, how am I going to do this? Everyone's industry is going to be a little bit different. I understood early on who the people were that were going to commission me. So kind of figuring at that time, it was like people, marketing directors and commissioners, then figuring out how to get in contact with them. Then figuring out, once I got commissioned the job, how long it takes to do the job from a brief to shooting to getting paid. That often was 6 months, and then you're kind of forecasting, okay, cool, your cash flow, because cash flow is super important in terms of just, you know, getting through a year. And then what that done was just took the stress out of being a creative. So I wasn't just always thinking, I was like, when's my next job? It's like I kind of had a few jobs lined up. I kind of had good cash flow for a certain amount of months. And then that led me to being like, okay, if I'm doing this project's going to be a marketing project or a personal project, and that's going to lead to another piece of work. So I can spend that time doing that creative thing and not being guilty about doing something that's not going to bring money. Because I wasn't represented as a director, I had to learn to do that side of things. So selling myself and my work. And I then realized that's something I was actually not too bad at. Actually, was pretty good at speaking to clients. And I think my personal style was understanding that everyone in a company just holds a position. So there's always someone that they had to please above them, and yeah, not take things so personally. They're just, you know, they have an agenda as well. So started to try to speak to people and understand their human motives. I invested time, and this was more at Mr. Porter, but I think I remember people that were in similar positions as me, so juniors, that I realized those people will be going to senior positions throughout their career. So now, obviously, all of those juniors are, you know, people in leadership positions that, because I have an authentic relationship and a history with them, they're more likely to trust me with work and stuff like that. So that's really, really important, investing in people, not when they're just the person that can give you something. And that's part of my process now as well. So there's like a certain amount of meetings I take each month that I give to mentor other people or help other people out. And it's not with a motive to get back, but often it pays back in so many different ways. So yeah, it's like carving out time and having a good structure. I think it's a useful exercise to try to define what success means to you first, and try to be honest about that, and also be open to that changing. So I think when I was younger, success meant recognition and status. There's still an element of recognition that is hard for me to shake, but I think it has evolved to creating work that aligns with my values and leaving a positive impact. If it has recognition, it's an extra win, but it's not a core component. For me, a key ingredient of success, or for what I define as success, has been consistency more than anything. And that is more my style. So I think I've seen people that are just pure talent and they're hugely successful, I don't think they're quite rare, right? I realize I'm not in that group of person, so my kind of approach to being successful needs to be doing things consistently, and that's led me to good success, whether that's like my craft as a filmmaker, whether that's building up the business. Yeah, so how I deal with imposter syndrome, I think I basically have got better at managing it. I think it always rears its head. Experience has just allowed me to kind of like sit in it sometimes, kind of like erases itself after a while once you kind of like realize the ins and outs and the isms of an industry or whatever position you're in. You kind of just normalize it and it becomes less of a thing that you've put on a pedestal, and you understand the workings of whatever you're doing. So that's kind of a way that I've kind of dealt with it, but it definitely rears its head. I think just doing the practice of the work allows you to help with that. The most fear I had was when I was first starting individualism by myself, and I think I probably spent a little bit too long doubting myself then. But the way I always see my past is that it was all necessary for where I am now, and I actually think I'm in a good place, and I'm hopeful for the future. So I wouldn't really say change anything in a way, but just trust your instinct and your gut. Those are the things that I think have always, as I look back, and has been consistent whenever I've trusted or not leaned into my instinct or gut. They've led to situations that could have had better outcomes. All right, I'll be honest, there's split into two lifetime kind of goals that I want to achieve, and getting recognized for the work that I do is an honest thing. And then the extrinsic kind of motivator on that level is leave a body of work that has helped create a better landscape for the next generation, which is part of the why thing, right? Which is like to progressively shape the way people see the world. I think we have a limited time on this earth, and if I've tried to do something to shift the needle and make people appreciate the world we live in some aspect, and shift culture in a good way, then I think that is a massive motivator. And I think it's a thread of a lot of the work that I do. I do a grateful diary every day, have been for the last 10 years. So wake up in the morning, have this diary, and then I kind of put like one thing that I'm grateful for, another thing that I'm proud of, and another thing that I want to manifest. The manifest has not worked, just to let you know. The last 2 years, terrible. Or it will manifest like years, maybe I'm just trying to wait for it to happen too quick. But reminding myself on a daily basis what I'm grateful for has really been a core element of, one, staying present, and then allowing me to kind of like project and move forward. I've had a few close people pass away in really tragic circumstances. It's really impacted me in a way that made me feel time is just not promised to anyone. So it's just reminded me to be like, even if you don't do it, if you've shot your shot basically and attempted to do one thing, even if you think it's like, way beyond your capabilities, at least you've tried. I guess the way I see life is to always shoot your shot, and I really respect people that are starting a journey and trying, more than being scared of trying, or mocking people that are at least attempting something.